Welcome again. This is Rob Love with Love and Company. Thank you for joining us today for part one of a two-part series that we're excited to share, highlighting a new product that I think will be important to a lot of communities in the future. Just some quick logistics before we go forward. Those of you who are veterans of our webinars will know all this, but if any of you are new today, please submit your questions through the questions box, the Q&A function on your control panel within Zoom. And we will hold all questions until the end. Although I will say the most popular first question is always, will we be sharing the slides? And the answer to that is always, again, as you veterans know, everyone who's registered for the webinar today will receive an email with a link to the full recording to be able to review if someone missed it today or to share with colleagues. So you will have access to the whole thing. And just a reminder, please do not put your questions into the chat. We won't see them there. We'll be monitoring the Q&A box. All right, so kind of a few different things we're going to cover today, really talking about why growth is important. Then we'll share some insights on data and tools that are available to help guide the process. Then we'll walk through an example so you can see how this actually works, in play for a community. Wrap up with some key takeaways, and we welcome your questions. Lauren, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good afternoon. My name's Lauren Houlik. I am Love & Company's Director of Market Intelligence. I've been with Love & Company for 5 years, in the senior living consulting space for 10, and in the senior living field since high school.
Hi, I'm Sara Montalto, Senior Vice President of Strategic Services. I oversee the Market Intelligence team at Love & Company, and I've been in the senior living marketing and market research consulting space since 2003.
Great, thanks. And again, I'm Rob Love. I'm the owner of Love & Company, and we are very appreciative of you all joining us today. Before we go forward, I want to give some credit and thanks to a non-presenter today, but who you will see has shared a lot of information with us that we're sharing with you, and that's our friends at Ziegler. They've been very strong advocates for growth in our field the last several years, and in support of that, shared, we're willing to let us share some of the slides that they use with their clients and in some of their conferences. So we appreciate their support during this as well. So some ways to approach growth. That's the biggest topic that we're looking to touch on here. And today is just part one of a two-part facet of that. And it's focusing more on where. If we can reach beyond our existing property lines and start exploring other areas to expand our mission, how do we go about identifying where those potential areas could be? Then we're going to follow up. The time frame is TBD, probably late summer, maybe early fall. We'll have a part two where we delve more into, once you've figured out, location or locations that hold the most promise, how to delve more deeper into those locations and really be able to figure out the right path forward for your organization. Sara?
Yeah, but before we jump in, site selection is a term that I'm guessing most of you are unfamiliar with it, and it's a term we coined for this process. But what it really is exactly what the name says. It's to help an organization to select the best sites or areas where there is an opportunity to develop something similar on a different site, explore nearby markets that have attractive growth potential, and really start the process of where you might be able to build a new community based on market demand.
All right, so this is where information from our friends from Ziegler comes in. Why is this topic important and relevant to us today? And many of you know, we all know, we're in a field that's growing tremendously. We have a population to serve that's growing tremendously, and that the next 10 to 15 years will be by far the greatest growth in the market that we have available to serve that we've ever seen, and probably will see in any of the lifetimes of the people that are here today. And even despite the downturn, the pandemic, today, as we see by the end of this graph and the blow up down here, we have more people living in senior living residences than ever before today. Yet, when we look over time, the growth by not-for-profit senior living providers has almost exclusively been on their existing campuses, which, if you've got land, that's obviously a logical place to consider and grow. But the population is growing all around us in all sorts of different markets, and markets that we may not have ever considered 20 years ago now are having enough depth to be able to consider putting a community in. Another thing that we're seeing is that today's prospect is more affluent than we expected them to be. A lot of times we'll go back in now and do a market study of an area that we had looked at maybe 5 years ago. And what we're finding is the affluence, the income levels of the people in that market area are significantly higher today than they were projected to be 5 years ago. So this is an important trend as well. Just to know that there is a significant amount of affluence out there in the markets that we want to serve. Existing communities, many are very healthy, strong wait lists today. Access to capital. Yes, we may have been spoiled a little bit a few years ago by extraordinarily low interest rates, but the interest rates that projects are getting financed at today are really in keeping with historic levels at which communities have always successfully been able to finance growth. So there are a lot of good reasons to think about growth today. And one of the things I know our Ziegler friends have repeated a lot is there's like a limited window here where the for-profit providers that have driven so much of the growth over the past several years, past decade really, are limited with their access to capital, which is a key opportunity for us in the not-for-profit side to really reach out and take claim to some markets before they can get that. Because if we don't take them, they will. So there are a lot of reasons why growth has been mostly on existing campuses. I know, COVID had a long impact on a lot of communities. And there's a lot of focus on just getting existing operations back up to where it needed to be in the couple of years after that. And another thing is just kind of the mental focus and orientation of most boards, particularly of single site organizations, where they've always been a single site and they've never thought about, well, should we grow by adding a second, a third, a fourth community? And yes, there's risk in opening a new site, but by far, most of the new sites that have been developed have been very successful. So this is a slide that I agree mostly with the points that Ziegler makes, but there's one item on here where they look at the activity level and say that the growth of satellite and middle market campuses has been moderate. Honestly, I would put that in the low category. Yes, we see some examples of communities that have either developed or are working to develop some middle market or just plain satellite campuses. But honestly, we have not run into very many of those. the last 5 or 10 years. And I really do think it's an opportunity that a lot more communities, a lot more organizations should be looking at. So sorry about the blip in the slides there, but there are a lot of good reasons for considering satellite communities, most of which just revolves around expanding your mission, but with less risk. They're smaller communities, not a full continuum of care. It gives an opportunity to broaden the mission by offering different types of community, like rental or middle market, or extending your existing position if you're a high-end community. There are lots of different ways to think about it, lots of different options that can be provided. And they're all good ways to leverage your brand strength. The challenge, though, particularly for single-site communities and also smaller multi-site organizations, has been finding the tools and the resources and the time to figure out, of all the possibilities that are out there, how do you figure out the right location, the best options? And that's what we're really going to focus on today. Sarah, do you want to touch on this?
Yes. So in terms of why did we develop the site selection process, the biggest reason is while we've helped organization, for many, many years in exploring where different adjacent markets have been to grow, but, prior to like 2-3 years ago, it was an organization once every other year, once every 3 years, versus over the past 2.5 years, it's really 2 to 3 organizations per year, every year reaching out to say, we want to know where to grow our organization and we need help with that process. And the previous manual segmentations that we've done in years past that, the multi-sites have done prior to some new tools that have been developed aren't very specific. They also have higher costs and relatively large sub-markets. And with new tools that have been developed, we've been able to standardize how we look at sub-markets to really show a greater nuance and do this much more cost effectively than the sort of old school manual methods. So it really becomes with this process, where do we start? So when should your organization consider this type of search option? It really comes down to, does your organization have a growth imperative? It could be a revenue growth imperative. One of the things that we've seen particularly with older life plan communities, they've combined their number of units over the years, so they've significantly reduced their number of independent living units over time, so they don't have the same level of base to spread those fixed costs, or growth in their mission that as they've changed the market they appeal to, they may not have as great of an offering that's really more of that mission middle market, and that they're looking to extend this. It also works very well for an organization that's looking to evolve their offerings in a new location, consider a new customer segment, or look at a new product offering and how that market might differ from where they are right now. The other thing that's come up as we've talked to organizations is that they know that they want to grow, but they're really unsure between a couple different product types to consider. So this process really allows people to come together. It's collaborative and interactive, and it supports that refinement. So if you're considering a couple different options, or if you're really refining who your target audience is or what your target product is, the process is designed with that level of flexibility and even comparing different product options side by side. So in terms of who should consider this type of process, it's really something that's targeted to existing operators. And in our creation of it, we're really focused on single sites, smaller multi-sites who are looking for new markets with similar conditions to where they currently operate, but then also looking at other markets that are adjacent that may look very similar to what their market looked like when their community was first built, or that entirely different product option.
So actually, Sarah, just for a little humorous sake, but serious, my take on the who should consider a site selection search, speaking to our audience today, is you should, because I think all of us should. All of our not-for-profit communities should really be thinking about ways that we can grow, ways we can expand our mission. We need it for many of our communities to sustain financial strength, to stay up to speed on our amenities and our offerings. And as we noted a minute ago, to prepare ourselves for increased competition that's going to come down the road. So, I like to answer this question: who should consider a site selection search? You should.
Thanks, Rob. So what are keys to this overall search process? It's really designed for communities that are looking to be proactive with where and how to grow your organization. It helps with defining how you evaluate any opportunities that are brought to you. And this is something that, even as we've been participating in this process with organizations, comparing opportunities that have come up to what they've identified with their core target, and whether or not it makes sense to move forward. And we actually were able to share recently some preliminary data with an organization to say, you know what, this is too far outside of what you say that you're looking for. Here are some preliminary data concerns, and make sure that they were aware of that. And they did decide not to move forward. But because we'd advanced those conversations, it's help them think more deeply about what they want for their organization and how they can use the data to guide this process. So now Lauren is going to talk to you about the data and tools to guide the process.
Thanks, Sarah. So before I get into the data and all of the tools, I want to take a step back for a moment and just think about the process, discuss this process a bit. So it's nothing new. Site selection has been around for years. Love & Company did not invent this process. We've simply created our own version of it to help walk single sites and smaller multi-sites through the process with us, supported by our industry expertise and our data and tools. A few things to note about this process: it's how the big guys grow. And real estate developers have used site selection for years to help identify the next best market opportunity to grow within. It's also used within the senior living field. Typically, it's larger for-profit organizations looking for that next best market opportunity, and even sometimes smaller multi-site not-for-profits. But the issue there is that it requires assembling your own internal team. It can be very resource and time heavy. So these larger organizations can dedicate those resources, but your smaller single-site not-for-profits have historically not been able to access these types of tools until now. There are three main tools that we use in our site selection process. The first is NICMAP, formerly NICMAP Vision. We use NICMAP to build out custom profiles for our clients that are unique depending on each client situation, and even build our own custom metrics like custom penetration rates, custom age and income cuts, and others that are most relevant to our clients' circumstances and goals for a project. We also use Maptitude. It's our mapping software. We use it to help develop an overall search area for the project, get a general high-level understanding of the lay of the land. And then at the end of the process, when we've identified the top areas for development, we provide another Maptitude map that shows both the location and size of the relative opportunities in your market we're recommending for further study. And then finally, just Love & Company, we leverage our industry experience. Our market intelligence team has a combined more than 50 years in the senior living space. So we take that along with our knowledge of the tools and have developed the process we're going to walk you through today. So site selection is based in traditional market research, something that probably a lot of us recognize, penetration rates, demand calculations, looking at your local age and income qualified households, and then looking at the local competitive inventory as well. So it's based on those same concepts, but there are a few major differences. One is that your typical market study uses a much smaller search area, typically about a 20-minute drive time, whereas in these site selection engagements, we're looking at much larger areas, usually from about an hour drive time up to several hours. So we're able to cover a much wider region. Another piece that's different on the site selection compared to traditional market research is we're using a number of additional metrics and data points to guide the site selection process. So there is a greater depth and breadth of that data, a greater breadth of that data. And the result of that is that you're able to explore a much larger region with more inexpensive data on average, and also that overall, site selection process, exploring that 1 to 3 hour drive time ends up being about the same cost as doing one deeper dive on that smaller, about 20-minute drive time market area. So another part of the process is that it's flexible enough to allow our clients and the organizations we've worked with to evaluate different product types. Sara had alluded to this just a few moments ago. And it's not to say that you have to come in with that high level of flexibility. We have certainly worked with organizations who came in with a very clear idea on what they wanted to build. We want a mission-based product. We want to go into underserved markets. We want to extend our reach in a very clear way that helped us target our search. But for other organizations who are more open to the idea of new products, coming in with this level of open-mindedness and flexibility can often benefit the organizations. We are able to craft the metrics that we're using to filter markets and compare them to target market rate type metrics or middle income metrics. We might have use metrics that are most appropriate for entrance fee communities or rentals, and others as well. Overall, the outcome of this process, this interactive process with our clients, helps us understand any nuances to their organizational goals and help best pair those with what we're seeing in the metrics and in the market opportunities we then present to the organizations we've been working with. So now I'd like to actually walk you through the site selection search process. I'm not going to share every single step because it is a process that occurs over about 8 to 10 weeks, but I'll show you sort of at a high level what you could expect to see, the types of data views, and the way we're going to facilitate that is with a theoretical client that we have invented for the sake of walking through this process together. So we created this fictitious client and scenario. We selected the Milwaukee, Wisconsin market because it's got a good mix of entrance fee and rental products to help visualize the data. And so we've created this fictitious organization, and we'll just share a bit about the organization here and then walk you through what we were able to learn together and the ways that those steps helped understand the organization, this fictitious organization, continually refine their own goals for the engagement. So this organization in Milwaukee is currently operating one existing life plan community, and it wants to grow. However, it is landlocked and is in a fairly densely developed area, so there's no opportunity to continue expanding on their existing site or to purchase adjacent parcels for expansion. So they're looking outside of their normal market area for growth. This theoretical organization is considering both life plan communities and rental for potential growth. I'll talk more on that now, but when they originally came to us, they were not originally considering both. In their minds, they had developed their reputation based on being a life plan community provider, and were thinking we would go into another market and start another life plan community. So more on that later. I just mentioned they have that established solid reputation in the region. So wanting to take advantage of that reputation and leverage any potential economies of scale, the client said they'd like to remain within about a 90-minute drive time. And their 4-member senior leadership team ended up participating in 4 meetings over the course of about 8 weeks. So that's sort of the tee up for this process. And now we're going to break it down step by step and give you a sense of how we moved through this process with this theoretical client. The first step is to identify a profile for your ideal market. This involves getting all of the stakeholders together around one table and really making sure all of the voices are heard. It also involves us as your guides through this process to challenge your expectations and really try to understand more about your goals and to question areas that you might have felt that the client may have felt very certain about, but that we want to ask these questions to understand those ultimate goals for the process. So an initial part of this occurs over a course of 2 to 3 meetings. And one of our first main goals is to develop a profile for the type of community our client is looking to construct or looking to target a new market for. The first bullet there, the community type, life plan or rental. I said I'd come back to this. So in this circumstance, our client came to us and said, hey, we have a successful life plan community campus. We have a strong reputation in our market. It's what we're known for. It's what we have cut our teeth doing. And we'd like to replicate this in the form of perhaps a satellite or even a full sister CCRC or life plan community campus. However, over the course of the meetings, having conversations with our client, we came to understand that it was not that their actual goals for growth were not merely revenue focused. They had 2-pronged growth goals where they wanted to grow revenue, but also wanted to grow their mission by serving underserved areas. So they made it clear to us they're looking for areas with lower penetration, more opportunity to develop, where there's truly an inadequate supply of existing senior living options. Through those conversations, and as that community or as that client became more open to the idea of a potential rental product, understanding how that rental product might better align with this mission focus, as we're identifying some more moderate underserved markets, a smaller in size rental product could be better aligned. But they kept their minds open to see what the market and data tells us. Also through this process, we refined the geography. So as we've come to understand that they really are wanting to make sure they're targeting underserved areas, that helps us to advise them to refine the geography, pulling out some of the most densely populated areas and focusing on those we know will be more closely aligned with their ultimate goal. Ooh, apologies. One too many. Also part of this early phase where we're holding our initial meetings and discovery workshops, we want to begin conversations around which metrics to evaluate. So there are the typical traditional market research metrics like populations, households, growth rates, and penetration rates. But this process also pulls in other metrics beyond your typical market research, like the labor market, real estate market, construction metrics, migration metrics. So we make sure that we understand our clients' goals, and then that helps guide these discussions around which of these metrics would best align with those ultimate goals. If and when needed, we will create our own custom metrics as well, custom age breaks, income breaks, custom construction metrics, and so on. Ultimately, after all of these conversations, again, occurring over the course of 2 to 3 meetings, we finalize a profile for what that ideal community might look like and ensure that we have buy-in from all stakeholders at the table. So here's an example of the outcome of those initial meetings. What we developed here are 2 distinct community type profiles based on what we heard from the client, wanting both revenue and mission growth. So we developed the life plan community profile, which is larger and supports higher levels of care, and then also a smaller rental community profile that might better align with some of these underserved, more moderately sized markets our client is seeking for development. We also, of course, identify ask them to think through and advise on any target minimum and average fees to help understand where those income cuts need to be for our market research and comparisons. So at this point in the process, we've met with our client, we understand a lot about what they'd like to develop, and now we want to start showing them the market. So the first step is we want to we first map the total search area. So in this case, our client defined a 90-minute drive time search area of their location in Milwaukee. That 90 minutes extended to almost Green Bay to the north, Madison to the west, and down to Chicago to the south. So that's that drive time encapsulated. The next step of the process is to segment that drive time market area into more manageable individual submarkets for analysis and comparison. So what we've done is we've mapped that 90-minute drive time and then segmented that drive time into 343 individual drive time markets. Each of those is the center of a zip code within that 90-minute drive time. And then you can see these gray areas mapped around the center of one of these little colored dots are the actual 30-minute drive time itself. So while the search area is a 90-minute drive time, within it contains 343 individual drive time markets that we're able to compare side by side and help us identify any helpful trends or differences that we may want to communicate to the clients. Also important here are just the vast differences in size and shape of these drive time markets, and it's why we advocate for using drive times when doing this type of research. You can see in the examples at the lower right, the zoom in on the Milwaukee market as a very sort of northern and southern market based on development in the area and the local access routes. Whereas if we look at Watertown, which is sort of in between Milwaukee and Madison, we see a very opposite drive time pattern there, sort of east to west.
So, Lauren, thanks for walking through that. The one thing that does tend to be a little confusing to some people the first time they see this map, I know it was to me, seeing all these dots all around, and I started thinking, each of those dots is a 30-minute drive time? No. It's each one is the center of. So they're like literally 343 30-minute drive times outlined in that map, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, so each of those colors just represents the middle. I just wanted to make sure that was clear for people because it was confusing to me first time. I didn't fully understand it the first time I saw it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I can actually point to, you can see a faint outline of the ones by the center that for those darker gray shaded areas are showing what the 30-minute drive time is of that particular dot.
Yep. All right. So now that we've created our market area, we've segmented it into manageable individual submarkets for analysis and comparison. Now I want to start narrowing down the metrics we're going to consider for the analysis. As I said, it's based in traditional market research, so there's all the usual population, growth rates, penetration. But in order to make this process work, it's about identifying the metrics that are the most impactful in the market. So we go through that same mapping exercise we just looked at for a number of different metrics to see where the trends begin to change and sort of where the patterns split. Because once you get into this research, you see that a lot of metrics tend to travel together. So it's really about finding those that are distinct in your market area and that are showing where those breaks within the markets occur. So now we're looking at a similar example. It's the same maps as before, but you'll notice a number of dark circles have appeared on this map. So because the theoretical client that we're working with in this scenario wants to identify underserved markets, we've started with penetration rates, which is a great starting point to identify where those underserved areas might be. So in this case, the dark red, orange, and yellow circles, again, they each represent the center of a zip code around which a 30-minute drive time is mapped. But in this case, the darkest red circles have the highest penetration, meaning there are already a high percentage of seniors in the market area living in seniors housing. And those areas with the lightest yellow have the lowest penetration, meaning there's a very limited inventory, very limited local age and income qualified households, or both. So at this stage, again, because we're looking for those underserved areas, we've started to identify these cluster markets where those colors are lighter and there may be opportunity for the market to bear additional development.
And Lauren, I think when we were going through this the other day, raised the question, where do those black circles come from? Are they developed by part of the mapping software? And I think you said that no, that this is where that most important human element comes in.
Mhm.
That's right. And it's not simply the, not just the human element, but it is the coalescing of everything we've learned about our clients' goals and matching that with what we know and to be true of the data patterns. So in this step, we are really manually looking for those areas where we have clusters of lower penetration. But we're also considering things like geography to help define these clusters as appropriate markets as we see, based on moving patterns within them in our interactive mapping software. Apologies for the slides. I'm on a bit of a delay. It takes a few seconds for it to change. All right, so now that we've identified, again, those markets that show theoretical capability to absorb new residences and that may be showing, indicating they're underserved, the next step is to view those clusters we've identified manually within the context of other metrics of importance. So I'm showing just two here, but we look at these for about a dozen different metrics to try to understand where those patterns begin to change. So on the left here, again, we've identified our existing market clusters for further study, but we're looking at the age and income qualified household density in that left map. So what you'll see is within those clusters, a lot of them are dominated by the lightest yellow dots, meaning they have lower age and income qualified household density. But you'll see in the legend there that any one of those yellow markets could have up to almost 10,000 age and income qualified households. So at this stage, we would work with our client to understand where the smallest, what the smallest market size is that they could develop a project within, based on the size of the project they are targeting to develop. We would also, of course, use our own expertise and experience to advise on where that line should be based on the metrics we are seeing within the market, and then we would also recommend pulling out some markets. So in this case, we see some very dark colors around the Milwaukee market and in Chicago, indicating lots of age and income qualified household density. We know those markets are developed. We know they're not going to be the markets for our client. So we would then pull those out, work with our client to redefine those breaks within our legend so that we can start to see different patterns within those market clusters and begin to eliminate some markets based on size, and in some cases, entire clusters. If you look at the map on the right, that is looking at those age and income qualified household growth rates. And you can see, while some of those areas that are in the yellow on the left, they're in very dark red on the right, indicating they're undergoing significant growth. So these are just a few examples of how we show this data in real time to our clients. We're taking them along the way. Every meeting that we would hold builds on the last. So we come with new data, new map views together, discuss them, and discuss what it would mean for their project, and then continue refining that process as we meet in future discovery sessions. So at this point, once we've segmented our market, we've looked at a number of different metrics, we've identified those that are having the most impact on market trends and patterns. Now we want to start ranking the markets. We've identified those clusters, our top 10 clusters that look the most attractive, and now we want to look back to the metrics that we had agreed upon as a group that would have the most impact, to use them to generate an overall score of market attractiveness. Typically, we will identify between 5 and 10 of those top metrics to include and work together to identify target values for those metrics, along with weighting for the metrics. For if a client is particularly concerned about their ability to recruit in an area, perhaps it might be appropriate for us to put a more heavy weight on the labor market metrics we've included for comparison. Oop. Apologies. So after all of that, We showed you the markets side by side or visually, and we showed those mapping examples. This is the ultimate output of that cluster market analysis exercise. So we've identified solid clusters, and then at this stage in the research, we would identify the most attractive market in each of those clusters. So in this case, we started by identifying 10 potential clusters after conversations with the client and redefining the bottom floor for the minimum size market for this type of project. We were able to eliminate 4 of those clusters, leaving 6. So here are our top 6 theoretically, and these are the most attractive sites by individual cluster. So one thing I want to really call out here is you see the sort of stoplight type icons, the red, green, and yellow. The red indicates that particular metric is in the least desirable third of the data based on our target values we've set. That yellow icon indicates it's in the middle third of the data, and that green icon would be in the most attractive third of the data. So what you'll see here is that while these are the top scoring markets overall, none of them are all green, none are all red, they're all a mix. So there are advantages and drawbacks to each of these markets, and it's more about aligning these metrics with our clients' goals. So some of the red stoplights in the top site for cluster 1 may not necessarily mean don't develop here. They may mean this market is less attractive for an entrance fee product. This would be a more attractive market for a rental product based on what that specific metric is telling us. Anything to add, Sarah or Rob, here?
So I would just say that because of the way this is showing the top performing metric in attractiveness, so what this could mean, if you look at cluster 1 and the underlying data, you might actually have 5 or 6 or even more zip code centers in that drive time that say outperform cluster 5. So it's not just looking at the top performing in isolation, but digging into the next layer as well to get an understanding of how many clusters in that are performing really well, because the more sites within a cluster means the more likely when you get to that deeper stage of research that and have a more targeted primary market area instead of the standardized drive time, that it's going to show that there's a sufficient market. The other thing I would just add is that when we were looking at all of those circles, that you were looking for places where there are a lot of circles versus a standalone. And that's one of the things that as we've worked with different organizations, so there might be a single zip code that its drive time looks amazing, but there's nothing else surrounding it. And when you're working with sort of that one dot in a cluster, that less likely that it's going to pass that next phase of market research if you're able to find a site in that area.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. So that really leads to what happens at the end of this process, that an organization gets lots of mapping and data and they participated on it. But what really happens next is community leadership is determining what areas they want to explore further. With some organizations, it's also included a board presentation of a summary of the results. I just mentioned that, looking for those clusters with multiple sites, they're really using this data to say, where do I want to search for land? So they may know that there is a certain municipality in their market that land costs are higher than what they want to pay, are really difficult to find, or that planning and zoning are extremely difficult. So there might be certain areas, either clusters or submarkets within that cluster, that they say, you know what, it's going to be way too difficult to get a project through. So they're layering in that additional level of experience and taking it to their board to really decide how to move forward. And then at the point that they have oftentimes it's a particular site in mind, or it could be an acquisition opportunity that an organization would come back to us for a typical market study to do that next level of due diligence to move forward. So we did want to share lessons learned for organizations as they go through this process. One of the big things is perception versus reality. And this is where, for a couple of organizations, we've dug a little deeper into certain markets that didn't pass the initial screens to really understand why. Because until you're looking at the underlying data, what you may think might have a great opportunity might not be the best fit for your product type, or you might not realize the amount of for-profits that have expanded in the market over time that have actually started to outpace the growth. So what would have looked like a great opportunity 5 years ago is now no longer. So it gives the data behind what's happening, particularly in some of those adjacent areas that you may know much better than something that's, say, 90 minutes to 2 to 3 hours away. It really also helps with enhancing who you want to target. Going back to Lauren's stoplight visuals, some of the discussions that we've had with organizations have had some really hard targets in mind with the types of sort of cut off of what makes a town too large that it didn't align with what their ideal market was. So it was the first pass was eliminating a lot of things. And that's another sort of digging deeper. You're like, oh, we would have thought X town would have shown up in the data, and then actually making the decision to say, rather than take that data point that we said, it is actually a hard limit, we don't want to exceed that, but changing it to a soft limit, which means it still comes in, but it just impacts the weighting. So some of that refinement really started to shift kind of the difference in the data with where they saw their ideal market from a strictly numbers perception versus some of the towns that actually ended that they thought were perfect matches that actually weren't if they were too stringent in how they wanted that targeting and refinement applied. It also helps understand competitive pressure, particularly as you get a little further from where your community or communities are located, that you may not know quite as much about what's changed in that market and how that's shifted and what may make something a good or bad market for development right now, and what is the number of units and total by care level, and then the average age of communities in those different markets. It also allows healthy discourse among stakeholders. So this is something that we encourage any team members to that are participating in, that we help that we're bringing different leadership team members for an organization that are going to have different perspectives on what the best product type or what the best market parameters are. So that willingness and openness to talk through what they think is important to the organization and why really makes the output of the research and just their alignment as a leadership team much stronger. But the process is designed to allow for that. And then sort of having a partner who helps guide you through that discussion and is encouraging that level and type of discussion and really wanting to hear an organization out about why they feel different ways and making sure that we're applying the model to best suit your needs. Overall, it just can be described as, an interactive process that's going to lead to refinement. So making sure that an organization understands that this isn't something like a typical market study where you get an alignment with goals up front, you establish a PMA, and then you come back at the end with what the numbers say. This is meant to show what the preliminary data is coming in based on previous information that they've told us, guide the process and focus on refinement. We've had search areas change substantially with pulling out areas and adding new areas in upon realizing, that really doesn't align with where they want to be and grow as an organization. So the process is really designed to support those types of refinements as we go forward. And then also provide the data visualizations to really guide those discussions. We joke around a lot at Love & Company about how much our market intelligence team loves spreadsheets, how much I love spreadsheets, but you know what? We fully acknowledge that when you really want to understand these key data points, being able to visualize it and the maps that Lauren's created for this process are so much more meaningful than trying to focus on a couple key data points in a spreadsheet. And then it's really been designed, and this wasn't necessarily one of the things that we even had on our radar to start with the way it turned out, but what the benefits that it's been to the board education process, both on market research in general, the types of data being evaluated, what it is a desirable area varies based on different product types that you're exploring, and then the education on the overall size and competitive pressures in the market. The board members typically know a lot about the immediate surrounding community, but not about the opportunities in a greater metro area. And then it helps bring alignment between the board and leadership team to what are the best opportunities for the organization and how they're going to vet sites that are brought to them in the future.
So thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Lauren. I hope that you've all taken away two key things from this, that I assume if you're here today, it's because you're thinking about growth in some way, shape, or form, and that you see this as a tool that really could help you focus on where growth could be most important, and whether growth is driven by revenue needs and revenue growth or just a desire to expand the mission, that there are tools and a process that are available to help you be able to do that. Sarah, I'm going to ask you to drop out of the PowerPoint for just a minute, because I'm going to ask each of you a question and let the camera focus on you for just a moment. And that is, as we do at the end of most of our webinars, what is one key takeaway? If there's one thing that you want our audience to take away today from everything we've shared, what would that one thing be? Sarah, let you go first.
Just that for the past couple of years, the Ziegler slides are a great example that it's focused on there's so much opportunity to grow. The site selection process really personalizes that for an organization and changes the focus on what are the best opportunities to grow in their adjacent markets.
Great, thank you. And Lauren, same question to you. If there were one thing that you would want people to take away from this webinar more than anything else, what would that one thing be?
I'd say that site selection is how the big guys grow, and it is more than due time for smaller single sites and smaller multi-sites to be able to take advantage of the same tools.
Great, thanks. And mine is pretty straightforward, back to where I started at the beginning. There's a substantial opportunity for growth ahead in the next 10 to 15 years. We have a lot of communities, a lot of organizations in the not-for-profit side that are looking for ways to expand their mission, looking for ways to expand revenue sources. And this is a great way to do that. There are markets that 10 or 20 years ago would not deserve our attention. They didn't have the depth to support either a full community or even a satellite. And that has changed today with the growth of the market. There are many more opportunities to grow. And this is a great tool to be able to help identify what those opportunities may be, where those opportunities may be for your market. So with that, Sara, if you could bring us back up, we will wrap things up here today. So if there is anything here, if you'd like to go forward, if there is anything here that you would like to follow up on, Wayne Langley, who we have been extremely pleased to have join our team the last several months, would be happy to set up time to talk and explore this more with you. And then we will open it to Q&A. You could probably go through a couple of slides. And we welcome any questions you may have on anything that we've gone over today. We have a couple here waiting to start. The first, Lauren, I think you kind of touched on it when you went through the example scenario, but let's revisit that. How long does it take to complete this site selection process?
I did touch on it. Typically about 8 to 10 weeks, and that is including those regular discovery sessions with the project team to continue refining, showing new data, and communicating throughout the process. It's also tends to be partially dependent upon the tape folks that we need at the table. Since we are often working with leadership teams, sometimes schedules simply limit our ability to condense any more meetings into any more time than about 8 to 10 weeks.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we have a question, not bashful at all, getting right down to the point. It's about cost. And I think we referenced that, one of you, I forget which, referenced that the cost to do a site selection process for a really large geographic area is about the same as the cost to do, a full normal study on one market. And the question was, can you talk about the consultant cost to budget for you to help us identify locations to expand our market reach to? So if people wanted to think about doing this in your head, what are some of the variables that might influence how much they should budget for this?
So the two biggest variables that are going to impact cost is how large of a geography are we talking about? Are we talking about a 90-minute drive time versus, say, a 3-hour drive time? That because we like to go really dig into the data beyond, in creating the different visuals. So that's going to impact cost. And then the other thing is the number of product types. Are you looking for, a single product type, which would be, it could be a, entrance fee life planning community where we're also considering assisted living and memory care at the same time. That would be considered one product type. But if you also wanted to have a rental community that might have a different number of units, typically for independent living and higher levels of care, that would be defined as a second product type. So if you're, say, looking at a 90-minute drive time, comparing two different product types. We're probably, I'd have to get a little bit more detailed into the numbers with the organization. We're probably just above 30,000.
So if you were to give a range, if somebody wanted to look for a single product type to looking at maybe a broader variety of things, a range might be from X to Y.
Probably I would go 28 to 36, and that includes both the consulting costs and all associated data costs.
There's a lot of data there. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So another question is, you Lauren, come your way with this, although either of you are obviously welcome to mention it, but some of your slides listed a number of different metrics that we look at. What are some of the things that may be different from a normal market study? What kind of metrics have you found are really impactful in helping influence the site selection process?
Yeah, absolutely. For one thing, I'll say that our view on the metrics is extremely customized by client and market. So what we've seen is most impactful in one market may be a different level of impact in another market. One example of that would be looking at migration metrics. So if you were operating in a destination market or an area we know has increasingly drawn residents and prospects from out of state, we would want to look at those local migration metrics to see if there are meaningful difference and different pockets of the market that might be more attractive than another. Another thing we look at in markets is age of inventory. If you are moving into a market and you are planning to have new construction there, looking at those markets that might have older average ages of inventory will, in many cases, could have an impact on the attractiveness of the market. We've also looked at the population age, overall average population age, and the speed with which it is growing, which, depending on a client's goals for their objectives for the project, could align with a market that is more balanced and is currently seeing young families with young kids and seniors living in the market, or maybe it's a market that's very mature for seniors and it has a much larger proportion and an older average age that is growing older quickly. So we look at those types of levers as well. Also labor metrics. Sara had alluded to the one circumstance, one of those lessons learned with a client, that how differently our clients can view labor metrics. One was looking to keep costs, lower, so looking for areas with lower hourly wages. Whereas another client said, "Oh no, we need to be able to recruit competitively from within the market we choose to operate within. So if we're in an area that has lower hourly wages for some of our key roles, we're going to have to recruit from outside of that market." And we've struggled with that in the past. So understanding those nuances and really making sure they're aligned is huge. Just rattle a few other off. We've looked at things like education levels in a market, depending on the type of product that is planned to be introduced. Things like veterans, insurance payment sources, and even poverty rates, depending on the type of product. Again, I think we've got a bit over 5,000 metrics that we consider for inclusion in this. So the list is quite lengthy, but there's a few high-level examples.
Oh, great, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other questions out there right now. We'll hold on here for just another minute in case anybody wants to put another one in there. I'll just ask Lauren and Sara, if there's anything else that you'd like to share before we sign off.
I would just say that one of the biggest drivers in where we go with the research is the product type that an organization is most interested in. And, when you're looking for two different product types, what often ends up happening is those clusters can vary. And it can also be related if there's clusters that make sense for both product types. That could actually come down to the size of a site with an organization. If they find a smaller piece of land, that they might be more interested if they're exploring a smaller rental community. So that's another layer of things in how an organization is using the data and decides to go forward.
All right.
I would add just a
Oh,
quick addition. I'd wanted to mention it back on my slides, but I realized I didn't. So I'll share it now. Just that, I'm reiterating the importance of our understanding our clients' needs and those nuances to their plans. One example being, in the client example that we shared, the theoretical client example, this organization was looking for underserved markets. However, through conversations with our clients, one of the things we need to understand is the degree to which they're willing to educate in their markets if they're moving in and they'll be the first new inventory in a space. So there are these types of nuances that only come out after several of these discovery meetings and it can end up being really important for a project and really important for how we are working with the data to make sure that if we are driving and recommending certain markets, that they're going to align with the level of investment our client is prepared to put there, into that property once they're up and running.
Thanks, Lauren. That's actually a really important point, and particularly when it's a low penetration rate situation and where the risk comes with that as well.
Right.
Thank you. And with that, thanks again to Sara and Lauren for all the time you've put into pulling this together, and to all the people that joined us today. Thank you. We appreciate your taking the time to listen in, and hopefully there's something good that came out of it and you can see some opportunities for your organization. So best wishes to everyone, and thank you.